Good afternoon and good evening to everyone who's joined us. Here in Israel, it's 9 p.m. It's good to see some familiar faces, and we're going to start. We have a very full session as usual. There's always this feeling I have where this is really just the tip of the iceberg, but we're going to try to accomplish a lot of learning together in this hour. So first of all, I just want to introduce Sharon Buenos, who's here with us from Zikaron BaSalon, and my colleague Dara Marcus from the NLI, who will be helping you in the chat if you need anything. We're just gonna get right started. So today we're gonna be talking about the Yomazicon, the memorial days in the Jewish calendar and in the Israeli calendar. I think it's actually fitting that we are right before Pesach. It's always a little awkward to talk about holidays or days in the year that are still not here. And here we are getting ready for Pesach, but we're already talking about the memorial days. But I think what I see the link to the story of Pesach is that Pesach is really the time where we're first introduced to this notion of having a calendar, of having fixed times and rituals and holidays in the Jewish calendar in general. And to some degree, Pesach is the beginning of our national collective memory. And the theme of going from destruction to redemption is very central to Pesach. And I think that today in the session, we'll see that obviously that's also one of the themes in our memorial days, Yom HaShoah and Yomazicon. I once read an article when I was a teacher. I presented this to my classroom. An article's a critique about the Israeli calendar, especially in this intense time from after Pesach and until Independence Day. And the writer presented that time of year as walking through an IKEA store. So for those of you who are familiar, basically you're forced to go through a certain path when you're going through the store, and you really can't choose your own path. It's much more complicated. And this feeling that the calendar really forces us to adopt a certain narrative. And I think part of what we're going to see today is that some people are challenging that narrative, why that narrative was created to begin with, and again, where people can find their own place in that narrative, and if they need to maybe create an alternative narrative. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to just show you a little bit about of what we're going to be doing today. So we're also going to talk in general about how central rituals are in Israeli culture and the debate around setting the dates for these memorial days. Maybe most of us tend to think that, it's set in stone, but the truth is there was a debate about when to have these dates and also how to call them. So we'll see that soon. And of course, we'll get a glimpse into some new initiatives for commemoration, and we'll talk a little bit about how we can incorporate rituals also in learning and why they're so powerful. So let's talk a little bit about rituals and what are they made of. So I think that also preparing for this session, it made me think a little bit about why we even have rituals in every culture and in families, in communities, and in every religion. And I think, again, going back to Pesach, it's about la'asot seder, to make some order, to make some sense of things that are overwhelming, sometimes overwhelming with happiness and joy, and sometimes overwhelming with sadness and grief. And rituals sort of help us create something that, again, is at times even technical, but gives us some kind of container to contain our emotions in and our excitement or our grief in some cases. So a ritual has a fixed time, a fixed structure. We usually incorporate text into the ritual, especially in religious ritual, but not only. Most of the time we have some kind of physical aspects to the ritual. There's a certain food associated or a certain garb associated with this ritual, and that's what makes it special. And we, of course, are also very much aware of the symbolic aspect. So every piece of this ritual has a deeper meaning. And so we're going through the motions, but we know that there's some symbolism behind it. Of course, there's a very strong aspect of tradition in rituals, and that also poses the question of sometimes we preserve rituals and maybe we don't know what they mean anymore. We don't really connect to what they mean, but we still preserve them because of tradition. sorry, what I wanted to just show you is the particular aspects and nuance. And the big question I think that really is in the background of this whole session today is, to what extent do we have the ability to have our particular connection, or to bring nuance to rituals? Or is that what rituals are about, being set in stone and everyone does the same thing at the same time? So the power of rituals, like I said before, is really giving us meaning and maybe making us more calm in times of overwhelming emotions. It also brings people together. And I have to tell you on a personal note, my kids just participated this evening in a global Seder before Pesach with kids from all around the world. And it was very touching and moving that they were all singing the same songs at the same time, and they were all familiar with them. And it was really a sense of being together. So that's the power of rituals. Of course, it connects us to our past. And again, the question of how much room we have for change and personal interpretation. And again, we'll see some of the initiatives today that try to challenge that. So just to give a little brief intro about what fast days we have in the Jewish calendar, because we'll see that there is a question of whether or not, for instance, the Holocaust Day, the Remembrance Day for the Holocaust, Yom HaShoah, should become a fast day. So again, I'm not going to go over all of this. And as usual, you'll have this presentation uploaded on our website and you'll be able to use it and share it. But just to give you a sense of the fast days we have in the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, which might be the most famous and well-known fast day, has nothing to do with commemoration. It has nothing to do with an historical event. It's a day of atonement, and that's the reason we fast. But there are other days, and you'll see the bottom four are all in the same color because they're all connected to the destruction of the temple, the first or the second or both. And over the years in history and in Jewish tradition, other calamities and other tragedies were sort of stuck onto those days. So Tisha B'Av, as we know, was the destruction of both temples. I have to say, I put that question mark there because according to the Bible, it's not clear if it actually happened on the 9th day of Av. Maybe it was the 5th day, or maybe it was the 2nd day. But again, in our tradition, it's about sticking things onto that one day that has already become a day that symbolizes destruction and grief over the destruction of the temple. So even if it wasn't exactly on the same day, we commemorate both temples being destroyed on the same day. Similarly, we have other calamities or tragedies, as you can see, in the Jewish calendar that are sort of put together with these days that already exist. So Asara B'Tevet has become the general Kaddish day. And it is a tradition that Moshe broke the tablets on Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, on the 17th of Tammuz. So just, this is really, again, to get a glimpse into the kind of fasts we have in the Jewish calendar and what they're made of. So what is the significance of fasting in the Jewish tradition, and why do we do that? Why is it such a powerful tradition that we have when it comes to our collective memory? So again, we have the element of atonement for sins. We saw that Yom Kippur doesn't commemorate a certain event, but it has that element of atonement, this feeling that if we purify ourselves, if we maybe get away from our physical needs, we can focus on the spiritual. And to this day, I think many people feel that fasting is an opportunity for them to focus on their spirituality. And there's also an element of commemorative mourning, like we said about the temples. And for instance, in Esther's case, supplication. And we see that in Israel, it's not uncommon for there to be a ta'anit tzibur, a public fast day, when, for instance, there's a drought and there's no rain, then it would be acceptable to sort of, say everyone should fast, and that would be something that would maybe make a difference. So the signs of mourning include no eating or drinking, that goes without saying. Also not wearing leather, which is a symbol of wealth and comfort, and refraining from sexual intercourse. In some of the fast days are full and some are minor, and that has to do with also the severity of the rituals, but also the time. Some start at sundown, like Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, and the others start at sunrise. And no bathing and washing is also relevant to those 2 days. So I want to give you a little peek into what the debate was in the Jewish world. Here, this is an article from 1955. We're talking not even that many years after the Holocaust. It's really even just to wrap our heads around the fact that it's not that it was right away after the Holocaust occurred. And in 1945, we know that Auschwitz was liberated by the Red Army. It's not like the day after everyone said, okay, let's have a memorial day for the Holocaust. It took some years, first of all, the establishment of the State of Israel, and then a debate about how to commemorate this, this enormous event and this tragic and traumatic event. So maybe we take it for granted that we have a Memorial Day for the Shoah, but it wasn't always like that. And here we see an article from J-Press, from our collection of Jewish press, from 1955, that there was a decision to commemorate this on what we said was the Yom HaKadisha Klali, Asara B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet, which again, it makes sense. It's a day that already exists in the Jewish calendar. It's a day that I would say, when it comes to the destruction of the temples, is a little more minor, and it was the right day to sort of stick another tragic event to, and that's what was that's what the rabbinate declared. And as far as we know, there were people who started commemorating the Holocaust on Asara B'Tevet. A few years later, in 1961, we see another article. This is from a different newspaper, saying that actually the commemoration of the Holocaust will happen on the 27th day of Nisan. This is usually during April, and the reason is for the Warsaw Ghetto Uprisal. That's we know that happened on Erev Pesach, but of course we couldn't mourn on Erev Chag or during the week of Pesach, so the decision was made to commemorate the Holocaust, fix it on the date of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and just put that in the calendar the week after Pesach, in order to still kind of preserve the historical context. Now we see another article. It's in Hebrew, but I've loosely translated it for you, and I'm going to read it. About there was a movement for, and Menachem Begin was one of the people who really supported this, is that it should be on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, like we said, is the day of calamity, the day of the most utmost tragedies of the Jewish people. And this is an article calling people to commemorate the Holocaust on Tisha B'Av. We all struggle with the issue of infusing old traditions with new content, since with time they become devoid of their meaning. And instead, here we are creating new traditions that are pale and unvital, the exact opposite of what we intended. The superficial Yom HaShoah, marked a week before Yom Azikaron, creates a disturbing double sequence of Memorial Days and creates an emotionally straining period of time before Independence Day. This diminishes the joy and excitement of celebrating the nation's holiday. Only Tisha B'Av, a day that demands new and relevant content and is well known to the entire Jewish world, can become the proper way to commemorate the Holocaust, so its memory won't be desecrated. So here we have this notion of, first of all, connecting the Holocaust to the traditional Jewish calendar and not creating a new Memorial Day. Connecting the memory of the Holocaust to the entire Jewish people and not specifically to the State of Israel. And as you can see, these are 3 dates that were suggested, and just as this is an example of a kind of a debate that you can have with your classroom or in your communities, have them divide into 3 groups, and each one of them maybe think of the pros and cons of each one of these dates that were that were suggested and that were proposed to commemorate the Holocaust. We know that in the end, the law was made in 1959 that it would be on the 27th of Nisan, and there's, of course, this is signed by David Ben-Gurion, the Prime Minister, and that was the decision that was made. And I want you to notice that the name of this day is Martyrs and Heroes Remembrance Day Law. So the law states not only the date of this Memorial Day, but also what it would be called. And of course, this whole debate of whether or not it should be on one of the traditional fast days or on a new date, and the question of how we call this day of the Memorial Day for the Holocaust, is these 2 things are intertwined, and they really do kind of represent a larger debate between secular Jews and traditional Jews, maybe between Jews who have this vision of the new Jew. When you come to Israel, you're no longer passive. You would not, something like the Holocaust would never happen when we're independent, as opposed to this maybe more traditional kind of way of looking at the Jew as the wandering Jew, someone who has dealt with strife and troubles throughout all of history. And it really, this debate really heightened that tension between these different groups. And like I said, Ben Gurion really represented the movement towards making a new date, and we're not surprised. And we have Begin, who's rooting for Tisha B'Av to be the Memorial Day, and in the end, Ben Gurion makes the call. So I think that looking at the title of this day, like we said, these are the different options and why they were chosen. In Israel today, it's very acceptable to call this day Yom HaZikaron BaShoah VeLaGvura, but also, maybe for short, Yom HaShoah. So what's this word Gvura doing in the title of this day? It's part of, again, this notion that we should be celebrating or commemorating Jewish the rebellion against the Nazis, the people who fought back, the people who were strong enough to maybe do something, like the people in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprisal. And we don't want to talk as much about all the other millions of people who were not in a position they could fight back. And that was a real, like a clash between the narrative of the new Jewish state and the story of the Holocaust. And I'm sure Sharon will also relate to this, but this idea that, and we know a lot of stories of people who came to Israel after the Holocaust and felt that it was something they couldn't even talk about, and they maybe were even ashamed of. And that's a very it's a very traumatic part of the Holocaust. Not only did they suffer through the Holocaust, but they also had to suffer this stigma, or this idea that they have something to be ashamed of. Now, of course, as you all know, we also have an International Holocaust Remembrance Day, it's commemorated on January 27th. Why? Because that's when Auschwitz was liberated by the Red Army. And so we see that this day has multiple days that could have potentially been days for commemorating the Holocaust. And there's some kind of like separation between how Israel commemorates the Holocaust and maybe how the Holocaust is remembered around the world. Again, the Holocaust is such a huge tragedy for all of humanity. So it also is appropriate for it to have an International Remembrance Day. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some new initiatives. So one of them is something that's called Hitkansut. This is a gathering for the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and in the Hartman Institute, they even created a Haggadah. We spoke about this in other sessions about how creating a Haggadah, it really is a sign of making a new ritual, but using maybe a traditional structure or a traditional idea of seder and making order. And if someone's writing a Haggadah, we saw that there's a Haggadah now for Sigd and for Novigod, then there's a message here that this is an attempt to renew something, but still stay connected to the tradition. There's another initiative to fast on Yom HaShoah, and it's called Tzom Nizkor. Of course, all of these are active links that you can look into for further details after the session. And in a moment, we're going to hear from Sharon from Zikaron BaSalon, but just to show you just a testimony, someone who's writing why they fast, why they've decided to fast on Yom HaShoah. And I think if we talked before about fast days being about connecting to spirituality and about maybe commemorating a very traumatic national event, maybe they even have a religious aspect. Here, it really is, for at least this person who wrote why they fast on Yom HaShoah, and as part of this Tzom Nizkor initiative, that it's really about connecting to, you know, again, the tip of the iceberg of people's experiences, and just to appreciate all of the good things that we have and not take them for granted. So I'm gonna I'm going to give Sharon the floor right now to talk about Zikaron BaSalon. And here you go.
Toda rabba. Hi, everyone. Just going to share my screen. I'm very excited to be here today and to speak about Zikaron BaSalon. And I will tell you a little bit about why Zikaron BaSalon started and how it started. I will also share my personal connection to Zikaron BaSalon and why I'm so lucky to be doing what I'm doing. And then I will show you or just go through how Zikaron BaSalon event should look like and hopefully inspire you within your own communities, host a Zikaron BaSalon event this coming Yom HaShoah or perhaps in the coming years. So if you can just by a show of hands or on chat, if you can tell me who of you heard about Zikaron BaSalon, if you heard about it, if you've been to one. Yay, thank you, Dara. Saved the day. All right. So Zikaron BaSalon is a new Israeli initiative to commemorate the Holocaust. And the reason why Zikaron BaSalon started is to fix Yom HaShoah. And the reason why we feel that Yom HaShoah needs fixing is for two main reasons. The first reason is the fact that we want the Holocaust Remembrance not to be only dealt with within governmental or state institutions, but also it's our responsibility. So in fact, we want to do a privatization process of Yom HaShoah, and we need to take ownership on remembering Yom HaShoah. And Shuvi mentioned that the Agadah of the Hartman Institute and so on, we look at Zikaron BaSalon as a tradition that is very similar to the same effect of what we do around the Seder night. V'higadat ala bincha. We see that it is our responsibility to pass the memory of the Holocaust from generation to generation. This is one reason why we feel Yom HaShoah needs fixing. The other reason is connected to the Holocaust survivors. Now, the Holocaust survivors in Israel, for them, Yom HaShoah, unfortunately, was just another day in the calendar. And if they were lucky, very few of them were invited to ceremonies, to official ceremonies, or if there was a school that knew about them, maybe they were invited to speak at a school. But technically, there was nothing for them to do on the day. And Zikaron BaSalon says, no, we need to put our Holocaust survivors in the center. We need to listen to what they have to tell us, and we need to carry their memories with us and pass it to the next generation. And how we do it, we try to become a tradition, and we're definitely getting there. If we're taking a minute just to look at the image of Holocaust survivors in Israel, we see few significant dates. When they came after the war, like Shuvi said, it wasn't something that they could talk about. It was a young state. We were busy building Israel, and no one had the time to open these wounds and the tragedies of the Holocaust. And often they were not only they had to keep quiet, but they also felt, the society here in Israel made them feel as if they were they were like lamb to the slaughter, and this was not talked about. In 1953, Yad Vashem opens, and this is the first time in Israeli society where we start to gather the testimonies, but this is just to gather them. There's nothing that we do with it. But then in 61, the Eichmann trial, and in fact, very soon it will be 60 years since the trial. There is a really huge turning point in Israeli society and how we treat our survivors, because for the first time, we're actually listening to what happened during the Holocaust. Then in 93, with the Spielberg archive, not only we're gathering testimonies, but we're finally filming them. And in 2011, the first Zikaron BaSalon, this is not only outside, we're bringing the survivors into our homes, into our hearts, to hear their stories. So how it started. Adi Altshuler, I don't know if you are familiar with the name. She is a social entrepreneur. She does unbelievable work in Israel. And to me, she really gifted the world with the gift of Zikaron BaSalon. To 2010, she's 24 years old. And she's in her car listening to some very sad songs. And she realized it's Yom HaShoah. She decides to go to Tel Aviv municipality ceremony, and she sees that she's the youngest one by far. And not only that, that she feels no connection to what goes on the stage. As she walks back to her car, she sees a lot of commotion happening in the flats above her. And there's apparently a football match that brought many Israelis on Yom HaShoah Eve to the living rooms. And then when she realized that that's what she needs to do, she needs to bring the Holocaust into our homes. A year later, in 2011, so in fact, this is our 10th year, on the 1st of May, she invites 8 friends to her parents' house in Hod HaSharon, and she invites Hannah Gofrit, who is the first survivor who gave her testimony of Zikaron BaSalon. The 8 friends become over 50 on the first night. And over the last 10 years, we had tens of thousands of salons in Israel and globally. And last year, maybe thanks to COVID, if you can thank COVID for anything, 1.5 million people took part in Zikaron BaSalon events, which is a huge number. And hopefully this year, only 3 weeks to go, we will see the same number and more. Now, I want to share with you my personal story and why I feel Zikaron BaSalon is so special and so unique. I was working I'm taking you back to 2016, way before COVID, when the world was normal, we were able to travel. I was working at the Israeli embassy at the time, and I joined the UK delegation from Art of the Living as an embassy staff. On the way to Poland, I heard about Zikaron BaSalon. I heard there's a movement happening in Israel. I didn't know much about it, but I decided on a Wednesday that I'm going to host a Zikaron BaSalon on the Sunday. I invite few friends. I go on Zikaron BaSalon's website. I understand the structure of the event, and it's done. I said to myself, you'll probably find a survivor on the march. You'll invite them to give their testimony, and that's it. And in fact, I did meet a survivor, I met few survivors, and one of them we became very, very close. And I'll get to her in a minute. But the magic happens the next day, the following day. We are on the bus on our way to Auschwitz to the march. And my sister from Israel is texting me, requesting that I will say a prayer for Bernie Spear. And I'm asking my sister immediately, 6 million, why Bernie? Who is Bernie? And I get no reply. And I do what we do when we don't know something. We turn to Dr. Google. And on Google, I find an article telling me that Bernie was only 19 when he was killed in Auschwitz. He was taken from Holland. And in Holland, and you can see Bernie in the 2 pictures on the screen in front of you, in Holland, Bernie had a lover, his first love, Alice Laman. And in Auschwitz, he kept a journal, writing to Alice every day, or every few days. And in his last entry of his journal, he writes to her, and I'm paraphrasing, "If these are my last words that addressing to you, my Alicia, please accept again my love, which I cannot describe in words, and my belief, my hope, and my determination that one day I will be so lucky and you will be my wife." And at this point, I am already very emotional, and I decide to take Bernie with me on the march. And I read more, and I see that Alice made Aliyah after the war. And on the day of her wedding, she had a messenger coming to her door, bringing the journals from Bernie. Alice can't bring herself to open these journals, and for over 60 years, they're kept somewhere safe. I'm taking Bernie with me and we're walking, and I'm taking pictures and sending my sister. And when we get to Auschwitz, I'm very, very emotional at this point. I don't know where to leave him. I want to take him with me more, but I don't want to bring him back to the place where he was killed at. And I decide to leave him on the tracks facing outside of Auschwitz, as if he maybe had in a different life, he had a chance. And we go in, and there's a beautiful ceremony happening inside. And as we walk out, my sister finally texts me back. And she's telling me that Alicia, came to her flat in Jerusalem the night before for a Zikaron BaSalon event, and shared the story of her and the story of Bernie. And I'm telling this story, I don't know how many times, but every time I tell this story, I have goosebumps. And I'm really sad to say that Alice passed away 2 months ago, but she was such a big part of Zikaron BaSalon. And this is why this project is so unique, because Alice's story will live on through us, and we will tell her story again and again. And Bernie as well. I carry Bernie with me wherever I go. And this is thanks to Zikaron BaSalon. We'll jump back to London. This is my first, you can see my first Zikaron BaSalon with Mala Tripik, who I met on the march. And you can see we're a very small crowd. And this is part of the beauty, part of the magic of Zikaron BaSalon. When Mala first sat down in my living room to share her testimony, the first thing she said to us was, "This is very strange for me. I'm not used to speaking to such a small audience. I'm used to speaking in front of hundreds of people." And I can't begin to tell you what I felt, but I just sat the entire evening feeling so horrible that I'm wasting her time. And what have I done? What was I thinking to invite her to speak in front of such a small crowd? When the evening finished, I approached Mala and I took her to the side and I said, I just wanted to apologize. And she said to me, "Don't be silly. You've changed my life." I thought to myself, this is not possible. How could I, with this gathering, change your life? And she said, "This is the first time when I see the people I speak to. I spoke from my eyes to their eyes. I saw their reaction. I felt the love that they had for me. I felt embraced by them. And it was very special. I'm used to speaking from a stage, from a podium, and I don't have this connection." And in fact, Mala came back year after year to my living room since, till we came back to Israel. But now she's joining us by Zoom during Zikaron BaSalon events that I'm holding globally. And we have a very special connection. So if I go back to what I said in terms of fixing Yom HaShoah and the connection to the survivors, Zikaron BaSalon, we know it because we speak with our survivors. Zikaron BaSalon is very important to their well-being, as much as looking after them for Purim and sending them mishloach manot, and even more so, because they know that they are sharing their stories with people who are there to listen and to carry those stories for the next generation. Now, if we talked about rituals and everything that Shuvi mentioned before, we also have some kind of framework for you to host the Zikaron BaSalon. And to us is a journey through time. We start with a testimony in the past, and this can be a Holocaust survivor, can be a second or third generation, can be an expert, and it can also, of course, be a recorded testimony. But this is very important. This is not a history lesson. This is the story of one family, of one person. We don't want to connect to the numbers or the dates. This is not what we're interested in. We can look this up. if we're talking about memory and collective memory, we can Google everything and get all the information we need to get on the Holocaust, on the Second World War. This is about the feelings, the loves, the hopes, the dreams, the sorrow, the tears, all of that. And this is what we're getting in Zikaron BaSalon through the testimony. We continue with the present, and this is an expression part. And this is kind of a hallway into the future, but in this part, we'll either play a song together, we'll sing together, we light a candle. If we have a group of young people, we might do a drawing together. So whatever art form you feel most comfortable with, this is something that we encourage everyone to take part, because this is an opportunity for us to come back to here and now, to reflect, to close our eyes, to think of what we heard. And then we move to the future. And the future is the discussion. And the discussion, often, especially last year with COVID, we had the Zikaron BaSalon events with hundreds of people. And I had people contacting me in preparation for this coming Yom HaShoah. And they said to me they were very excited. We had such a huge event. We had 400 people, 500 people. And I say, this is great. And people took the time off from their schedule to listen to a survivor and to do something that is relating to commemorating the Holocaust, but it's not a Zikaron BaSalon event. Because with the Zikaron BaSalon event, we have to have a discussion. And the reason why we have a discussion is because we want all the participants to take an active part in the event. We want them to think. We want to challenge them with some questions. We want them to think about their future. We want to see how the Holocaust is relevant or significant to their lives today, and really how we can become better because of what we just heard. So the discussion is very, very important. So this is in a nutshell. Obviously, in Israel now, luckily, with the vaccination, we're able to gather again, and hopefully we will meet again in the living room. But the past year taught us that Zoom is an excellent, we are here now on Zoom, we're having this event, and we can get the same magic of Zikaron BaSalon on Zoom as we would in the living room. So if this is something that you find interesting, I encourage you to be in touch with me. Write to us, call me, I'll give you my WhatsApp, whatever works for you. And I really hope that you'll be able to bring Zikaron BaSalon to your community. Zikaron BaSalon also influenced, and Shuvi will touch on this a bit later, but we also influenced other communities or other parts of Israel who wanted to share their story and use the concept of the salon, of the lounge, of the living room, to tell their story. So we have our brothers, who is for brothers and sisters of Shuvi, help me, I forgot.
Fallen soldiers.
Fallen soldiers, sorry. Thank you. We have Misaviv LaMedura, around I lost it. For Lag BaOmer. These are stories about the beginning of the State of Israel and how the State of Israel was established. We have story about different stories that are now taking place in the lounge thanks to this Zikaron BaSalon influence. And now we're ready for your thoughts and comments if you have, or any questions. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see you. So good, everything was clear. So it means that everybody will have a Zikaron BaSalon event this coming Yom HaShoah. And I'm going to write in the chat my email address, okay? So you can feel free to write to me and reach out. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharon. So again, if anyone wants to contact Sharon, and look, I sent you the link to the website also in the email. and you're welcome to kind of dig deeper and see what you would like to do. And like Sharon said, this new initiative of Zikaron BaSalon really affected the way people in Israel think about the ways we can remember, the ways we can commemorate, and really give place to the people who've experienced things in the past, and not just stick to the traditional rituals that have been developed. So transitioning to Yom HaZikaron, in Israel, again, like I said, often the Remembrance Day for the Holocaust is just called Yom HaShoah. And when you just say Yom HaZikaron, usually most people don't say Yom HaZikaron Lechalelei Tzahal, and we'll see soon about the same issue of what this day is called. But when people just say Yom HaZikaron, that's what they mean. And Yom Asicon is maybe one of the days with the most detailed ritual and sequence of events in Israel. So first of all, there's a siren that is sound also on Yom HaShoah. And for Yom HaZikaron, there are two sirens. There's one in the evening. The day itself, the Yom HaZikaron itself starts in the evening. Like any Jewish holiday or any Jewish day, also Yom HaShoah. And there's a siren at 8 p.m. There's also a siren in the morning, a 2-minute siren, not just a 1-minute siren at 11 a.m. And I'm sure that most of you saw the video, the short video I sent you in preparation for this session. Really, last year was a big challenge, and it was clear, I think, to all Israelis that what would happen in those moments in the siren. And with COVID and all the limitations that we know, how are people going to be together in that moment? And so you saw a little piece of what Israel looked like in those moments. It's maybe one of the most powerful moments in the Israeli year. And there are other aspects, other ritual aspects, and other things that happen during this day. So there is in the entire state a lowering of all the flags. There are special prayers that are said or sung during every single ceremony. In the main ceremony at the Western Wall in the evening, or in Har Herzl, Mount Herzl, in the morning. There's always a speech, usually by the Prime Minister, the President, etc. But even in smaller ceremonies, and of course wreath laying, and as it is a military service, it's also ended by a military gun salute. Now, it's important to say, and we'll talk about this in a moment, that there's a special memorial ceremony held for the victims of terrorist acts during this day. And the day ends basically with a ceremony that ends the day, the Yom HaZikaron, and transitions right away to the opening ceremony of Independence Day. And I think that really encompasses the emotional burden of that transition between Yom HaZikaron and Yom Ha'atzmaut, something that is very difficult for Israelis, and it's almost a given. Let's talk a little bit about, maybe before we get to this, a little bit about the difference between deciding about the date of Yom HaShoah and deciding when the date will be of Yom HaZikaron. So first of all, I think Yom HaZikaron is much more Israeli than it is universal. And also in the Jewish world, I think the commemoration of Yom HaShoah is more central in most communities outside of Israel, and that's natural. There isn't an Israeli who doesn't have some kind of personal connection or personal story that has to do with Yom HaZikaron, as opposed to maybe Yom HaShoah, like Sharon was saying. It's something that people really need to work at and invite into their homes. I would also say that the date of Yom HaZikaron of the Memorial Day for the IDF soldiers is a ritual in and of itself, in the sense that we're almost year after year reenacting the historical moment of the people who founded the State of Israel in 1948, who were fighting and in battles the day before, and literally the day after, we're celebrating the independence and the founding of the state. So the fact that we have these days one right after the other really kind of it crystallizes that emotional that time that going from battles and having friends who have died in battle, and going straight away to celebrating the founding of the new state. So that's a very, I would say, central thing in Israeli society, that very difficult transition. And there were debates about this, but it's pretty much from the get-go, there was a committee, and there was a decision made that that's the date. The 4th of Iyar would always be the date of Yom Asicon. So just to give you a glimpse into some of the ways that this day is central for school, for students in schools, we see here a certificate that we have in the National Library for a student, and you fill in your name, or the principal or the teacher fills in your name, from a school here in Petah Tikva, but this is very typical of other schools as well, that this child, the student, has volunteered to give time and do some work for the Yad Labanim, which is the Memorial of the Sons, or it's an association for bereaved families. And it's very acceptable to this day that students go and volunteer with these bereaved families. They help clean the cemeteries, the graves. They go to the families and speak to them. And so it's just, it really is a very significant day also in the educational system. And in the schools, we do see that, of course, the 8 p.m. siren is something that happens in the home. But in school, there's the 11 a.m. siren across the state, and usually most ceremonies start with the siren. Of course, there are also activities, lessons given by the teachers in the morning. The same prayers and songs are sung in the school ceremonies, in the school services. And something that's very central and very strong, not only for Yom HaZikaron, but also for Yom HaShoah, there's a certain playlist that Israelis already know to identify as special songs that are only played on the radio on that day. There's some songs that, even though they don't necessarily speak clearly about soldiers or about anything like that, everyone knows to associate them with that, to the extent that sometimes when you hear that song on the radio, your heart misses a beat for a moment, because I could say for myself that when I was growing up and in high school, there were a lot of terror attacks, and every time we heard one of those songs on the radio, we knew that there was some tragedy that happened. And so it's sort of like it's a signal. Something that is very acceptable, and you'll see later in the presentation, you have the link to an interesting article about this. There are stickers that are given out in the school system of a specific flower. It's called Dama Maccabim, and there may be some reasons why that became the official memorial flower. But everyone has that sticker on their pocket. And in schools, it's very much the day for the alumni to come visit. Usually they come with their uniform if they're in the army, or just in general, they come to gather in the school. I would say, again, from experience, that once you're out of high school, there's a little bit of a gap. People are very much used to being in some kind of ceremony, and people miss it. They don't know what to do on that day if they're not going to a ceremony, and therefore most people find a place to go for some kind of ceremony or service. And many times the bereaved families from the school community come as well. And of course, going to Mount Herzl to be part of also the ceremonies there. And oftentimes, so like I said, students are involved in helping and supporting people there. So this is the sticker of Dama Maccabim. And again, there, you'll see there's an article I recommend reading. It's an interesting article about how that became such a big part of Yomazicon. What is Yomazicon called? The official name is Yom Asicon לחללי צה"ל ונפגעי פעולות איבה, which means the day, the Remembrance Day, not only for IDF soldiers, and that we know that in 1963 there was a law that was passed that it was called Heroes Remembrance Day, or for the War of Independence and the Israeli Defense Army. But in 1980, they made they fixed the name of the day to be Memorial Day for the fallen of Israeli wars in general, and therefore they included people who were also killed in the pre-state battles. But then in 1998, also the inclusion of victims of actions of terrorism. So this day as well has gone through a few stages of who's included in this Memorial Day. It's important to point out that there's another day of the year, and again, we see a little bit of the tension between the rabbinate or the religious group that called for the 7th of Adar, which is the day of birth and death of Moses, to be the memorial day for fallen soldiers whose place of burial is unknown. Now that's in the Jewish tradition, that was because no one knows where Moses was buried, it became a tradition to commemorate people who we don't know where they were buried on that day. So it's important to point out there is a plot dedicated to people in Har Herzl, people who we don't know where they were buried. And in addition to the 4th of Iyar, there's also a special ceremony on the 7th of Adar for those people. This is the special Yizkor prayer that is said, that was written especially for Yomazicon in Israel. And it is, of course, said in every ceremony and in school ceremonies as well. And I think it's an important thing to point out. Also in secular schools, of course, the students or the teachers or somebody reads this prayer. It's not always said by a cantor or a rabbi. It's really a part of it's a very strong part of the ritual of Yomazicon, whether it's a religious or secular institution or framework. This is a poster that was made for Yomazicon. And just sort of before we close this session, if people also want to just share in the chat a little bit about what this makes them feel, this really demonstrates how when the siren, when you hear the siren in Israel, and that's something that you also saw in the video, people know what to do. People really stop in their tracks. They just stop and they stand for the 2 minutes of the siren. And I'm sure you also know that there's a lot of debate and there's a lot of controversy about people who choose not to stand during the siren. Like it's almost sacrilegious even for someone secular if they hear about someone not standing during the siren. So it's a very strong part of the ritual of this day. Also, as you can see, the flag's half-mast. Let's talk a tiny bit about some new initiatives for Yomazicon. So a beautiful project that, again, this is linked, this is an active link, and you can look it up also on Google. Beit Avichai, which is a cultural center in Jerusalem, started a beautiful initiative where you can watch videos. A lot of them barely have any words, or even if they do, some of them have subtitles. So I really recommend looking at these short films. And each one of them is very different, illustrated and animated by someone else in memory of soldiers. We also, before Sharon said about Our Brothers, which is a very similar format to Zikaron BaSalon. And another thing that you can learn about is the Havdalah ceremony between Yomazicon and Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is an initiative of some place called Beit Tfilah Israeli. It's I would say it's a center for Jewish prayer, but it is not an affiliated center. It's not part of any of an Orthodox or conservative or Reform movement, but rather something very Israeli, very open to anyone who wants to take part. And I think we were talking before about the Seder as a formative ceremony and a ritual. So here they took the notion of Havdalah because of what we were talking about, that the transition between Yom HaZikaron to Yom HaAtzmaut is extremely difficult. And they sort of took the idea of Havdalah, like when we try to transition from Shabbat to the new week, in the same way. So there's a beautiful ceremony that they do based on the Havdalah, where they make that transition in a little bit more of a smooth way. Just to relate to the question of how we incorporate rituals also in our educational work. And I think going back to the beginning, to the opening of this session, we spoke about the Seder, about Pesach, and about giving things their order, their meaning. I think also, whether it's in the classroom or in the community, we can often, as educators, bring that Seder. We can create order, we can bring the structure. And I think it's very helpful for people when they're learning something new or when they want to express themselves. It gives them a setting that they can express themselves in. And also it brings people together, just like we said about the rituals. And at Seder night that we sit together at the table, I think it's one of the most powerful things. And like we saw today, I think also in rituals and in ceremonies, there's something very unifying about that. The Seder plate is about the sensory experience, about not just talking about something or thinking about it, but actually doing something. And again, I think some of the initiatives we saw here today are about that doing element. And even to the extent of a sensory experience, if you're having guests in your living room, and part of the experience is also, it's very immersive. It's not just talking about something or learning about something. And I think also with students, with learners, we can always think more about how we can make their learning experience more meaningful by doing those kind of things. We spoke about the Magid part, the text, the songs that really can enhance and reinforce the memory. And I want to say in general, and I think that's something that really in the library, we stress this a lot about setting the stage for people to research, inquire, and really think about things in a critical way. And I think that the Seder night really brings that to the front and encourages people to be thinking and questioning individuals. And I think also the things that we've seen tonight are exactly that, an attempt to say, we have these rituals, we have these traditions, they're very strong. We're at the point where we can really start questioning, where's our piece? What can we do differently? We don't have to accept everything the way it's been. There were reasons for things to be developed in a certain way, and maybe now we can kind of renew those traditions and change them somewhat. So as usual, you also have some links here, some useful links of our materials for these days. I've selected some other items that might be of interest to you. We have, of course, a really beautiful collection of Chana Senesh's archive, and there's a short video here that you can watch that gives you a glimpse into that. And also, if you look on our website, we have more items from Chana Senesh's archive, and a few other things, again, that you can look into a little bit more on your own. And as usual, we are happy for you to fill out the feedback form and tell us about how this session was. And Dara's going to share the feedback form, the link in the chat. And if anyone has any last comments or questions.
תודה רבה וחג שמח.
חג שמח.
Thank you.